November's Financial Literacy Month. I know
Yes,
we kind
indeed.
of
We talked about it earlier. Yeah.
kicked off our show with letting everyone know. It's hard to believe it's November, Todd. Halloween seems like yesterday. The holidays are really going to be upon us.
Yeah.
For Financial Literacy Month, this month, we're really talking about three, we're going to call it back to basics, core competencies of what we do here every day. Obviously, we know buying a home is the biggest purchase of a consumer's life. We know the mortgage is the biggest debt. We've talked about that lots. What we're going to be breaking basically the rest of our show down into, we're going to be talking about income, we're going to be talking about assets, and we're going to be talking about credit. So, there's certainly lots of great information throughout the show. So I really do encourage everyone to keep your dial where it is. And we're certainly going to do a little bit of a deep dive. So we're going to talk a little bit about income right now. Yep. And, certainly lots of hot trends going on in Canada.
Yeah. And you wanted to focus a little bit on self-employment because this is obviously self-employment is probably, it's nearly as simple as somebody coming in with a T4. This is my job. This is my record. Mm-hmm. This is my letter of employment, blah, blah. There's a lot to this, right?
Yeah, I think being self-employed is definitely more complicated, and more Canadians are becoming self-employed all the time. And I think the trend is even now, since the pandemic, people have changed the way they work. I think some people have chosen to become self-employed just due to maybe their work doesn't exist anymore, or maybe, they don't want to work from home, or maybe they don't want to return to the office. So I think more people are becoming self-employed. Mm-hmm. And if you have not been self-employed for the last, 3 years, sometimes it is more challenging to, get mortgage lending.
Yeah.
And I think even if you have been self-employed for a longer period of time, sometimes that is more challenging. I hear from so many consumers that are self-employed that are very scared of banks because they've been told no once or twice or 10 times.
Right.
I think self-employment, it takes a lot of guts to be self-employed.
Yep.
And sometimes you make good decisions as a self-employed person. Sometimes you make bad decisions, and that can impact the income that's showing on your tax returns.
Right.
It can impact your bank statements. It can impact your credit. So I think that self-employed people, for me, I think are lower risk.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. I'm self-employed. You've been self-employed before,
I have,
Todd.
yep.
If I need to make more money, I can just work harder. It may take a couple months to come, but I can certainly put in more effort and I can really up my game, and that can certainly make an impact. When somebody's on a salary, it's fixed income. You know exactly how much you have to work with every 2 weeks. Yeah. And, you might get overtime or you might get a bonus, but usually people that are on a salary have pretty steady income over the year. Mm-hmm. So because I'm self-employed and because, obviously, we deal with a lot of self-employed people, we can really kind of specialize on knowing what the best solutions are. And I can tell you there's certainly a lot of self-employed people that are sole proprietors. And that is a very common way that somebody is self-employed, just because that's kind of the easiest barrier to entry to be, opening a business. You can get a business license and you can operate under your own personal name. You don't need maybe, fancy, accounting, or you don't need a corporation, which can obviously cost money. And, there are many customers that will become a sole proprietor because it's very easy to just kind of turn that on. And obviously, like when you're a sole proprietor, you have to take on a little bit of risk, Todd, because obviously everything that is you is the business and the business is you. So we do see a lot of those customers, and a lot of times their personal finances and their business finances are all kind of tangled together, and we kind of need to sometimes unweave that web that has been made. So that certainly can be an impact. And I think sometimes even those consumers that are sole proprietors, they're trying to claim every single expense that they can possibly find to bring their income down.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to pay income tax. And, we've used kind of that old adage, if you want to not pay a lot of tax, you might have to pay a higher interest rate because maybe you have to take a higher risk type lender. But there are lots of lenders out there. And I would venture to say, Todd, it's easier now to get a mortgage as self-employed than it used to be.
Yeah.
Because there certainly are a lot more lenders that have the appetite for self-employed people. And there are a lot of even bank lenders that are very apt to work with self-employed people to make it work.
Why is that?
I think the federal government really put a mandate out that, more Canadians are, becoming entrepreneurs. And I think the banks were really told to be more flexible and more accommodating to self-employed people. I'm certainly seeing it from what I do. But I think even if you are self-employed and if lending maybe is a little bit more flexible now than it used to be, I still would say that you need to go to an expert that knows how to put all your pieces together and really kind of the best foot forward.
Yeah, but it's still it fundamentally, lending comes down to risk, though, does it not?
Mm-hmm.
And there's an associated risk. It's a science.
Yeah, and I think
right. So that there's still that component.
And income
to
is
it.
a big piece of the risk
Right.
that lenders really assess, whether you're self-employed or not.
Right.
The one thing I can say, if you're self-employed, there's certainly things that we can do to mitigate that risk.
Such as?
Maybe we look at your bank statements.
Yeah.
Maybe we look at contracts that you have. Maybe you're newly self-employed, but you worked in the same industry. So here's an example, Todd.
Okay.
Let's say you're an electrician.
Yeah.
And you've been an electrician the last, 10 years, and you decide now you're going to become self-employed. I have seen lenders take a risk on someone who's been self-employed for like 6 months, 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
Normally that wouldn't happen. Normally you need 2 full years of tax returns, and then we would average that income, and that's what the lender would use. But what we've done in these type of cases is we'll go back in history. Let's look and see how much you made with your employer the last couple of years.
Right.
Let's justify the income you're making now that it's going to be continuing.
Yep.
So
Credit.
Credit is obviously a
Huge.
big impact.
Yeah.
Your assets are obviously a big impact. And I think cash flow is a big impact.
Yeah.
So I think it's about painting a story. It's like, do you have contracts from customers? Do you have contracts from another business? How can you help me help you,
Yep.
paint the best picture? And I think it's about asking a lot of questions. Yeah. And I think it's about putting that together. For me, the first thing that I do automatically, I want to know what your tax returns look like. Where is your income coming from? Is it coming from a T4? Is it coming from professional income? Is it coming from business income? Is it coming from a dividend? I want to know the sources of the income, and I want to know what income you have on paper. Obviously, if we can use your income on paper, you're as good as someone who has a salary. Same.
Yeah.
Same. But that's not always the case. So it's about asking more questions. Most lenders, if you use, sole proprietor income, they allow you to gross it up. Some allow like a 15, 20% gross up.
Right.
Some lenders, if you own a corporation and you're taking a dividend, some lenders will allow us to gross up the dividends.
Yes.
Also, some lenders will allow us to add back a percentage of your net income after dividend and taxes from your corporation. So there's a lot of lenders that certainly have very unique programs, and not every lender is the same. I can tell you for self-employed, wide variety of what's offered out there. So I really, if you are self-employed and you're looking to do a transaction, I think certainly seeking the advice of an unbiased mortgage professional is really key.